Hey guys, welcome to my channel where we dive into all things true crime, crazy and unknown historical events, ghost phenomena, and more. If all of that is of interest to you, definitely consider hitting the subscribe button and also the bell icon so you don't miss any of my upcoming adventures or cases. Today's video started out as one case that I was researching, but as I was continuing my research, I kept stumbling across other cases that were very similar in the sense of having the same outcome, and that was that the killers were all known as the Tasmanian Devil killers. And no, I'm not talking about the Looney Tunes character or the little animal, but since there is going to be three different cases today, let's waste no time and jump right into the first one. Throughout the articles, Martin Bryant is described as a mass spree murderer. However, he is most well known as the Tasmanian Devil. Some articles even connecting his quirky gaze with the Looney Tunes character. Martin was born on May 7th, 1967, in Hobart, Australia, and he was the oldest of two children. According to reports, he was a very odd child while growing up, and during childhood he suffered severe bullying from his peers and never seemed to make any friends. Teachers also stated that he was unable to show the proper emotions at the right times. In 1983, at the age of 16, he got a disability pension due to his low IQ of 66, and according to his psychiatrist from the time, he never excelled in school and could barely read and write. Instead, he would spend the majority of his days gardening and watching TV. 4 years later, in 1987, when Martin was now 19 years old, he decided to make some extra money by offering his gardening services to neighbors and other people around the city. This is when he met a 54-year-old millionaire, Helen Harvey, who took a huge liking to Martin and eventually even offered for him to live with her and her mother in her mansion, as long as he was willing to help around the house. Helen was considered to be very eccentric around town, but in her older years, she needed a lot of help running errands, and Martin was willing to help out. In 1992, Martin and Helen were driving around town together running errands when the car suddenly lost control and crashed, killing Helen instantly and injuring Martin. In the aftermath of this accident, he was listed in her will to be given $500,000 of her fortune and her mansion. However, talk started spreading around town, and they believed that Martin had a tendency to jump for the wheel while people were driving. But whether that is just a rumor, no one really knows for sure. A few years later, Martin's father, Maurice, who had been recently diagnosed with depression, was found dead at the bottom of a dam with diving weights tied around his neck. After his father's passing, Martin inherited another sum of money, this time totaling $250,000. At this time, his father's death was considered a suicide due to the nature of how his body was found and the recent diagnosis of depression. However, in recent years, it seems people have speculated that Martin may have been involved in his father's death, if not both his father's and Helen's death, with a motive of inheritance. However, this is just speculation derived from his behavior after the fact. But as I mentioned before, many people from his childhood mentioned that he portrayed the wrong emotion at the wrong time. Personally, I don't think that he had anything to do with these two deaths, but I do think they paved a clear path for what would happen just a few years later. On the morning of April 28th, 1996, Martin got up and started his day like any other day, and he got ready for a day trip to Port Arthur, which is a historical colonial port in Australia, and it's about an hour away from where he lived in Hobart. Just before arriving at the port, he stopped at a seascape guest accommodation site, which was owned by David and Sally Martin. Martin went into David and Sally's house and fired several shots. Then he gagged David and stabbed him before continuing on his way down to Port Arthur. Martin went into one of the cafes and purchased a meal, and while eating, he started up a bunch of conversations with several people around him, talking about wasps in the area. His comments about wasps were later believed to be remarks about white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, which has the acronym WASP, but this has never been confirmed. After he finished his meal, he walked into the cafe to return his tray, assisted by some people who held the door open for him, and once he was inside, he put down his bag on a table and pulled out an AR-15 rifle with one 30-round magazine attached. The cafe was very small, and all of the tables were very close together, and it was a particularly busy moment in the cafe while people waited for the next ferry. The events that unfolded next happened extremely quickly. Martin took aim from his hip, first firing at the couple seated next to him at the table, killing them both instantly. Then, according to survivors, he lifted the semi-automatic to his shoulder before continuing to fire the rifle. At first, people thought that there was some kind of reenactment taking place, but after the shooting continued for a long period of time, they realized there was a very real threat and panic ensued. However, due to the size of this cafe, there was not much that could be done, especially since Martin was blocking the main exit.
All the people that are dead are in the cafeteria and around the bus. He actually shot people on the bus.
We need to disregard one of the cars came back.
Port Arthur was a black day for the entire nation and a lingering horror for those who were there. I know that you tend not to talk about that dreadful day 15 years ago, but you must think about it a lot, even now.
Oh, well, a day never goes by that you don't think about it.
Vera Jari and Coralie Lever were on holiday together with their husbands at the wrong time and the wrong place. Their men, Ron and Dennis, were ordinary blokes who turned out to be heroes. They died shielding their wives from the hail of bullets.
Dennis thought it was a reenactment, actually, and went to walk away, and that's when Den pushed me to the floor when he started shooting again. And
protected you?
And protected, yeah, very much so, yeah.
And at the same time, your bloke was doing the same thing for you?
We were a little bit of distance away, but the same thing happened there. Yeah. But Dennis didn't move from where he was standing, actually. He was shot there.
3 or 4 people dead that were covered up near the buses.
For nearly 30 minutes, Martin continued the rainfall of bullets before fleeing out of the cafe and back onto the highway towards David and Sally's guest house, driving very erratically, laying on the horn, and waving vigorously out of the window. Before arriving back at the guest house, he noticed Nanette and her 2 young children running on the side of the road, presumably away from danger, which he pulled over and actually had the audacity to offer them a ride in order to escape the shooting. Before Nanette could even respond, Martin shot the toddler that she was carrying. The other child that was next to her started running down the street as Martin ordered Nanette on her knees and shot her point blank in her temple before getting out of the car and running after the kid that was running down the street and tackling and shooting her as well. Knowing that his spree was probably coming to an end soon, instead of getting back into his car, he noticed a BMW that was pulled over a little ways down the road, which he stole after killing all 4 occupants, and drove a little bit more down the road before seeing a Toyota Corolla and forced the driver Glenn into the trunk of this car and then fatally shot his girlfriend before taking the car and continuing the rest of the way to David and Sally's rental property, then setting the Corolla on fire once he arrived. However, Glenn was not found in the trunk burned like he claimed originally, and instead he was found shot in the rental property. At this point, police believed Martin had a total of 4 hostages in this rental property, which began the many hours of negotiations. After 18 hours of this, in the early hours of April 29th, Martin attempted to escape after setting the house on fire and fleeing in the madness. However, he was quickly apprehended and taken to a nearby hospital to treat his burns that he sustained while trying to escape. When all was said and done, Martin Bryant claimed the lives of 35 people between the ages of 2 and 75 years old. After the trial, Martin was found guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 35 life sentences without the possibility of parole. To this day, it is unclear why he did what he did, although some speculated that he was just getting even with a world that showed him such disdain over the years. In the aftermath of it all, Martin's neighbor was horrified to realize that Martin had foreshadowed these events the morning of the spree, mentioning that he was going to do something that made everyone remember him. And although it was obtained with heinous actions, he will always be remembered as the Tasmanian Devil killer, but he isn't alone.
Bryant was arrested at the scene, and shortly after, he confessed. At the time, Carleen Bryant and her son's lawyer encouraged him to plead guilty to alleviate enormous amounts of public pain. But in her recently published book, she now claims, beyond belief, that her son isn't guilty and the evidence against him was never tested at a trial. But are you really saying that you think if he'd had a trial, although you convinced him to plead guilty, he might have got off?
Well, yes.
Is that
because Martin always, when he was questioned, probably for weeks before I saw him again, he always said he was never in Port Arthur at Broad Arrow.
And you believed him?
Yes. There's no evidence that Martin was there.
But none of that was needed because Martin said in court, yes, I did it. And you went along with it.
Exactly.
And now you wish you hadn't.
Of course, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. A lot of people on that day came forward after, and people who knew Martin had known Martin for years. And they said, as far as they were concerned, they didn't recognise the gunman as being Martin Bryant.
Peter Shoobridge was a wealthy man from Hobart, Australia. He was a published poet who also restored antiques and lived a quiet life on a country estate with his 4 daughters occasionally. But one Sunday, Peter Shoobridge snapped and turned into a man who would be called the Tasmanian Devil in the local press and local gossip. In the quiet early morning hours of June 26, 1997, Peter slit the throats of his 4 daughters, ages 9, 12, 14, and 18, leaving them to die in a pool of their own blood, and only the eldest daughter seemed to have woken up during the altercation, because when they found her body, she had slash marks across both of her palms, which is a clear sign that she attempted to fight her father off, but Peter eventually overpowered her. Peter then drove to the nearby town of Cambridge and mailed letters to family members with explanations of his shocking deed, stating that he did not want the girls to continue living in a troubled world. After returning home, Peter called the police and reported a murder-suicide at his own address. Then he went out to his workshop and chopped off his right hand. No reports of this incident really mention why he would have done this, but the most popular theory is that he was feeling guilty about what that hand had done. I don't see any reason for this because he did call the police and report a murder-suicide, so he clearly knew that at some point before the police were arriving, he was going to kill himself. Police are still baffled as to why Peter went crazy in the first place, but they suspect that a recent separation from his wife Wendy, who recently won the custody of their daughters, had something to do with the massacre. No one expected 52-year-old Peter Shoobridge, the son of a wealthy farming family and an accomplished poet, to be the next Tasmanian Devil, since he had no history of mental illness in his family, nor did he give clues leading up to this that he was planning the quadruple murder and his own mutilation and eventual suicide. But the list of Tasmanian Devils continues. Although the other 2 cases are extremely devastating in their own manner, this next case is infuriating in a whole different way because the murderer was able to walk free just a few decades after committing his heinous crimes. As Tamika Ridgway and her soon-to-be husband, Dean Alley, slept in their Hobart home one night early in February of 1986, Jaime Curtis and an unnamed accomplice broke into their home and bound the couple. Tamika says they dragged her fiancé into the bathtub and beat him senseless, at one point even boiling a pot of water and pouring it over his beaten body. Meanwhile, the 2 intruders took turns with Tamika, sexually assaulting her, and after hours of this torture, the couple was then taken at knife point and driven to a dense foresty area. Once they parked the car, Jaime ordered Tamika to get into the trunk and shut her in. After she was closed in, she heard her husband's pleading before he slowly fell silent. Later, she found out that he had been stabbed viciously to death. A nearby farmer heard the commotion of what he said sounded like a pig attack and ran over to see what was going on. This farmer was able to call the police, and Jaime and his accomplice were arrested shortly after. By the end of the whole ordeal, Tamika and her fiancé had been tortured for 12 hours. The two men were charged and convicted of a series of crimes including murder, rape, indecent assault, burglary, and abduction. Jaime was sentenced to life behind bars, but was given the chance to apply for a fixed jail term after new legislation was passed in 2002. His prison term was then shaved to a non-parole period of 30 years, making him eligible for parole in 2016, and in 2018, Jaime was released after he was deemed a changed man, despite the fact that he was denied parole in a previous application after being found to have an incurable personality disorder with many psychopathic traits.
The parole board noted that this is a man who has personality disorder that cannot be cured. Why take the chance?
Just because you have certain personality traits doesn't mean you're going to commit offences. It's about balancing and managing the risk, and you have to trust the parole authorities. They have the expertise.
Shortly after leaving jail, Jaime met a woman named Sharon on a dating app while he was using a false name to hide his true identity. A few weeks later, however, police issued a restraining order for Sharon against her new partner after her children claimed he had physically assaulted her. Jaime was sent back to prison only 2 weeks after his release for breaching his parole conditions, before being re-released once again on January 27, 2021. He quickly picked things back up with Sharon where they left things off, and she denies that he ever assaulted her. He is still forced to follow strict release protocols, which require him to be on parole and to wear an electronic monitoring device for the rest of his life. Tamika, who is now 52 years old, says that Jaime has never showed any remorse and believes he should have never been allowed to walk free, especially after having already flouted his parole restrictions, and I 100% agree. I don't think there should have been any way for this man to negotiate his already given life sentence, and it is especially baffling that he was released after receiving a previous denial to his request. But lawyer Greg Barnes, chair of the Prisoners Advisory Legal Services in Tasmania, says parole boards make a calculated decision based on balancing and managing risk, and he said while no system is perfect, and parole authorities can and do get it wrong, the majority of the time they do get things right.
Mr. Curtis? Mr. Curtis, just give us the opportunity to have a chat. Mr. Curtis, I just want to ask you, can you please reassure the community that you're safe, that you deserve this chance? Mr. Curtis. You know, your victims just want to see some remorse. If you have some remorse, can you not tell them that? He leaves an angry Sharon
Out of my fucking face!
to do his talking. What do you say to those people who are worried about him?
Worried about what?
Well, about the fact that he's breached his parole.
He didn't.
Well, he did, actually.
How? He was put in jail.
Do you not understand
because the police reckoned he hit me. But he didn't.
Your own children said he hit you.
My own children? I think you better go and ask them.
Okay, I will. Thank you. Do you
Please.
Listen.
Go away from me.
Just leave me alone.
No. You go away.
All
Do you
I want to
understand?
do
Go
is
away.
speak to Mr. Curtis.
He don't want to.
Do you understand?
But that is going to be it for today's video. I know that these were pretty heavy stories. It was definitely a little challenging to research because the crimes were so brutal. I tried not to go into too much detail with the murders itself, but hopefully you were able to learn something. Definitely comment below what you think of these cases. I'm especially interested to hear what you think about the last case in regards to Jaime's early release. Do you think that the strict protocols that he has to follow are enough considering the crimes that he committed? Also be sure to put a like on the video to help me see what kind of content you guys enjoy watching. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming cases and adventures. As always guys, I appreciate any and all support, and I will see you in my next video.